Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining the podcast again. I am so delighted to have with me today Sara Avant Stover. And she is an author, a teacher, a mentor in women's spirituality and entrepreneurship, and a certified internal family systems practitioner. After graduating Columbia University's all-women's Barnard College, she had a cancer scare, moved to Thailand, and embarked on a decade-long healing and spiritual odyssey throughout Asia. And since then, she's gone on to uplift tens of thousands of women worldwide. And so I am so excited for our conversation today. I know that you have a lot to share. And I know when it comes to heartbreak and grief, you have a lot of knowledge and wisdom. And so I'm really delighted that you're here, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so just to start out with, maybe just let people know how you got to doing what you do now.
Well, I arrived here based upon what you just read in my bio, which is that I had a cancer scare when I was graduating from college in New York City. And that cancer scare really woke me up to my mortality. I was, how old was I at the time? 21 years old at the time, and woke me up to the fact that I wasn't invincible. And I felt like I had been running from a lot of pain, particularly from unresolved childhood wounds. And that showed up in my late teens and early 20s through anorexia, through bulimia, through high achievement in school, through over-exercising. And that health diagnosis was just a call from my body and my soul, just saying, no, we can't live this way. We can't do this anymore. And after that health diagnosis, just serendipitously, I got a job offer to teach in northern Thailand. And I headed over there, which I thought it would just be for a year, but I ended up staying for 9 years because living there was so transformative for me. I really got to experience a slower pace of life, rather slower than here in the US, which can be very driven, very achievement oriented. And I was able to drop into more of a seasonal way of living, more like rhythmic way of living. And that led to healing in my body. And from there, I started to develop a body of work to support other women with similar transformations. And it has just continued to grow and evolve since then over the past 25 years.
And how timely that I hear this story after I just come back from Bali, and you talk about the different pace there and how this has been my life story too, as a principal and a teacher. It felt like we were taught that, you work hard, you put in that extra time, and, you get things done quickly and efficiently. And just coming back from there, it is a completely different pace. And I just found the people there so happy, and just, yeah, it's hard to explain, but a really different lifestyle. And I can see where healing can take place in that space too. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So beautiful. And so now, how wonderful that you're able to help others on their journey. I did look at your books, and I see that you have, is it a handbook for heartbreak? I think it was called. Just tell us a little bit more about how that story and how you came to write that.
Sure. It's called Handbook for the Heartbroken. It's my latest book. I have 3 books, so it's my 3rd book, and it just came out. And that book grew out of an experience of a very dark night of my soul. And whereas my first book, The Way of the Happy Woman, I wrote in my early 30s after all my experiences in Thailand, this book is now coming out in my mid to late 40s. about a season of my life between 2016 and 2020 when I experienced serial heartbreaks in quick succession that touched and decimated every area of my life, my intimate relationship, my work, my money, my health, my social status, and even my very sense of self. So actually, with all of my 3 books, the titles of the book come to me first. And so the title, The Handbook for the Heartbroken, came to me after the first heartbreak, after the first of several heartbreaks. And that was in the spring of 2016. So it was a few months after my former fiance came home one night and told me that he'd been cheating on me. And it wasn't just with one person, one time, it was with many people over many instances for many years that we were together. And to say that I was devastated is an understatement. Anyone who's ever been betrayed, you know that it just splices you through your core and really shatters your relationship with yourself, obviously your relationship with the other person, your trust in life. And I went down into a deep place of grief and depression from that. And the title Handbook for the Heartbroken came to me then as I felt like I was being more deeply initiated into grief and healing. But there were still several more heartbreaks to come that I had to live through, which I wasn't aware of at the time. But on the other side of them, starting in 2021, the name was still with me. And I had the space in my life again. I had more of a foundation again to really devote to writing and creating the book, because one of the challenges that I went through those years was not feeling like I had the support that I needed, and feeling like we live in a really judgmental society of really looking down on people who are struggling and telling and being very uncompassionate, saying, hurry up and move on with it, and not really having an understanding of what it takes to heal. So I wanted to offer a guidebook, a companion for people through those dark valleys of their lives.
Beautiful. Yeah. And isn't it interesting? Sometimes the people that I've worked with have had, not just one loss, but multiple losses. And you're talking about multiple heartbreaks. What advice can you offer to people in that kind of situation? I've gone through one major loss here in the last few years, but not, successive losses like that.
Well, one of the main teachings in the book is that the only way out is in and through. Also, one of the core philosophies that I teach about in the book is that heartbreak, or really anything that we face in our lives, is here to teach us something. Our lives are unique to each of us, and they hold a unique curriculum for our unfolding. And so a heartbreak is here to evolve us in some way, to grow us in some way. And so for me, over those years, while they were nearly unsurvivable, and while there were times where I wanted to take my own life, where I didn't want to keep going, also a deeper part of me had the faith that this was happening for a reason. And I don't say that in a Pollyanna-ish way, but that at some level, my soul had chosen this path. And another thing that helped me in terms of that, the only way out is in and through, is these teachings that, or these universal laws really, that it's always darkest before the dawn, that morning follows night, that spring follows winter, and that this too shall pass. Whatever we're experiencing, it's a law of nature that things change and that things move in these seasons and cycles, going back to that wisdom that I learned in a really deep way when I lived in Thailand. There are these seasons and we can trust them. So there'll be seasons of heartbreak and there will be seasons of rebirth.
Yeah. And that was very prominent when I was there too, all that comfort in knowing that nothing lasts forever. I mean, it's like you say, with the sun and the moon, the day and the night, the months, the seasons, all that is cyclical and life is cyclical. And so just having that hope that there is going to be a better day coming, because like you, I had some pretty dark nights of the soul as well. And it's not an easy thing. And I know we can try to be positive. And that's one of the things I want to talk to you about, the thinking positive and the difference between that and the spiritual bypassing that sometimes happens. You want to speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah. So when we're going through a challenging time and we just try to think positive or raise our vibration, it's kind of like pouring pink paint over everything. It's not actually addressing what's actually there. And so when we do that, we're not healing at the root level. And so spiritual bypass is this process of going in and through. And, the core healing modality that I use, internal family systems, it's a cutting edge psychotherapeutic model. It's woven throughout the book. For instance, internal family system takes something like an inner critic part. And rather than just saying, I'm just going to think positive thoughts, I'm an amazing person, I love myself, I accept myself, likely that's just going to cause the inner critic to get more and more ramped up. But with a modality like IFS, we go in and through and we get to know the critic part. We get to know why it has this role of criticizing us, who it learned that from. Likely there was someone in our childhood that spoke to us in the same way that our critic is talking to us. We get to understand why it took on that role. It was protecting us from something. And through that process, we can gradually get the critic to dial back and down. And it's the way that it speaks to us transforms. And our critic can then become an ally. And it can actually be the one that's saying, you can do this. You've got this. I believe in you. So sees a different approach. It's not top down. It's like bottom up. It's transforming from the inside out. And that's when things are really going to work for us. So it takes more effort at the front end, but in the long run, it's a much more effective and just a more easeful and peaceful way to live.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and I think it's hard to get to that space by yourself. And I think that's, the reason why we have people like you to help people walk that journey. Because, and you mentioned this earlier, a lot of people are like, okay, well, it's time for you to, move on, get over it kind of thing. And meanwhile, we've been doing our best to be positive and to think positive thoughts and all of that. But like you say, that's not often the way we can heal. And so having this, and I don't know a lot about this family systems that you work with, so you can totally enlighten me on all of that as well. And I'm sure the listener would like to know more about that program and how you've talked a little bit about how it works. But if I was going to come to you as a client, what would the approach be? What would we be working on?
Yeah, so it's called Internal Family Systems, and the acronym is IFS.
Okay.
And it's a psycho-spiritual model that a man named Dr. Richard Schwartz founded in the early 1990s when he was working with young women who had eating disorders. And what he discovered as he was working with them was that they spoke in a way that's very familiar to all of us. They would say, a part of me wants to cut myself or hurt myself. And a part of me judges myself for that. A part of me doesn't want to do that. So IFS looks at each of us as having a multiplicity of parts within us, saying that we're not just a singular mind, we're not just a mono mind. And we've all had that experience of saying, a part of me wants to do this, part of me wants to go out tonight, another part of me wants to stay in.
Yes.
And the core IFS, some of its basic premises is that all of our parts are welcome and all of our parts are inherently good. Even if, like those young women in the eating disorder treatment center, even if they're cutting, even if they're binging and purging, they might be doing, quote unquote, bad things, but at the root, they have a positive intention. Just like I was saying before with the inner critic, there's a positive intention to want to protect. And IFS says that we have a core self with a capital S, akin to like Buddha nature or your spirit that spiritual traditions talk about. And this core self can never be damaged or destroyed. And so what we want to do is to get those parts that are more extreme, that tend to kind of take us over and hijack us. We want to help them to feel safe enough that they can dial back so that our essential self can lead the way more of the time or most of the time. And the result is a feeling of much more inner harmony, inner peace, inner collaboration, wholeness. And as we start to experience this more internally, those qualities start to be more reflected more externally as well. And external relationships and dynamics can start to shift as well.
Interesting. Yeah. And I can see a lot of parallels with this program and some of the things that I've been listening to and hearing about, having parts of self, your spiritual self, as well as your human self, and having compassion for that self and loving that, because I struggled with that for a while. I'd be like, well, why am I still upset? I know he's okay. And almost beating myself up for it a little bit because, why? But I think when it was pointed out to me that there is a whole human aspect here that needs nurturing and love and care and has been taught certain beliefs that need to be looked at, it kind of opened up a world for me of understanding on how I could work through some of this stuff, which can be very confusing, I think, especially in the beginning.
And this is why we can't do it by ourselves. We really need each other, especially when we're going through challenging times.
Yeah. Yeah. And having these kinds of conversations about it, because it's not something that I would be talking with my friends, over coffee on the weekend. It's not the information that we come with. It's not something taught in school. It's something beyond that. And yet so important to be able to understand ourselves in this way. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So what has helped you the most, on this journey that you've been on? And it seems like it's been quite intense. What's really helped you?
Well, everything that we just talked about, IFS, again, it was the core healing modality that I wove throughout the book. And I delved very intensively into that over those years. That really allowed for a real deep healing and transformation to happen. So I could experience that deep wholeness inside. And so that then my external life could also start to reflect that wholeness. So that was a major piece of it. And so was just my spiritual connection. And for me, that's a connection with God. And I don't say that in a religious sense. I'm not religious, but for me, God is source, connection to universe, and really opening up to that higher presence and asking for help and aligning with divine order. Because I quickly realized that my own individual will was not going to help me navigate the situation. I needed to open to something greater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that belief in something greater, I think, is huge. And when we start to get curious about that and what else is out there, people, I think, get frustrated at first because they're like, well, I want to connect and make, and so can you help people with that part of the journey, especially if they're just starting to understand that there might be something bigger out there? What did you do to help yourself connect with that higher self?
Well, I have some exercises in the book that guide readers into this in more depth, or listeners, for those who are listening to the audiobook. But one of the things is we can just really look at those times in our lives where we have felt that connection, because we all have. And it might have been in a beautiful place in nature. It might have been at the death or the birth or wedding of your own or someone that you love. It might have been a time when you were in deep connection with someone, or just something that happened spontaneously when you were by yourself. But to remember those times where you felt like something just cracked through ordinary consciousness and you felt a connection with the all, or you felt a connection with something that feels more mystical that you can't quite put words to. So first is just to validate your own experience that we've all had that. And then to remember just how that felt for you, how you experienced that. Was it something that, did you feel certain things in your body? Certain things happening in your mind? Just what was that like for you? And then you can see what it might be like to start to come into more conscious relationship with that each day. And we could do that through prayer, which we could also just call divine communication or cosmic connection. And you can ask for support with certain things, specific things that you're dealing with that day. And you can also invite in guidance. So I often say that prayer is when we kind of make the petition, and meditation is when we kind of receive the response. So we want to open up this two-way communication so that we're not navigating life by ourselves, because there is a divine blueprint that is within each of us. And there is a higher order that knows the greatest unfolding for each of us. And so what we want to do is come into relationship with that, to kind of download that and to receive the guidance around that. And intuition is another way that this speaks to us.
Yeah. And you mentioned meditation as being a way of receiving some of that. And I know there's people, that say, well, I can't, I can't meditate. That's not something I can do. What would be your advice to that?
Well, we all meditate, whether or not we're aware of it. It's when, even if it's just for a moment or two, it's when we are just sit and be. It's actually our natural state of being. So one assignment that I often give women when they say that they're too busy to meditate is just take 5 minutes a day. Instead of checking your phone for that extra 5 minutes or being on email for that extra 5 minutes, just sit with yourself. And that could just be sitting with a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, just sitting in a chair, looking out the window. Notice your breath. Feel the sensations in your body. Notice the temperature, the air in the room that you're in, the sounds.
Yeah.
It's often easier to do that in the morning or before bed when we're outside of the momentum of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then I think there's always that expectation that there's going to be this voice that's going to come in and they're going to say, and I know over time I have learned that those messages are quite subtle and that they come in all different kinds of ways. And the meditation definitely helps with that. It helps to calm the mind a bit and give that space for it. But can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yes, we often hear the phrase connecting with the still small voice within. Mm-hmm. And the voices of the mind, or we could say in IFS, like these parts, like the critic part or the taskmaster part, they often speak loudest. And so we want to create spaces in our lives where we can drop below our parts. And kind of, it's like when you're sitting near a lake or something and you want to wait until the waves calm and there's a stillness and you can see the bottom. And that's when we can get more of that guidance. And like you said, some of us, it comes in a voice. For some of us, it's just a knowing. Maybe we get an image. It's different for everyone, but we start to learn the ways that our own inner guidance communicates to us, and we start to build a relationship with that. And the more that we lead our lives based from that guidance, kind of the better off things are going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, well, this has been fantastic. So, where do you see women getting stuck in this process? Because I know it happens. When I first lost Blaine, I talked to quite a few different women who had lost their spouses or lost someone in their life. And I had interviewed a lot of people. A lot of them said the same thing. People get stuck in that process. It's like they can't move forward. What advice do you have to those people?
Well, I'd say that that's really common. And I also want to say that there's no judgment if that's the case. And it's kind of a natural outcome of living in a culture that tells us to hurry up and get on with it, where we're not given space or resources, financial, social, or otherwise, to really grieve. A lot of ancestral traditions, and even some areas around the world now, they say that you need like a year to not be actively engaged in work and child rearing and social obligations, and that community needs to support you during that year so you can fully grieve. We don't have the luxury of that.
No.
So we need to educate ourselves, and that's one of the intentions for this book, of how important it is to really just do our best to find the time and the space to turn into this. And so when we do this, the way that we don't get stuck is by feeling the feelings. It's like, that's where the saying, like, you have to feel it to heal it, or the only way out is in and through. And we're also not taught how to feel our feelings. And we're also taught that these more challenging feelings are bad and we need to push them away. And again, paint over everything in pink paint, put on a smile, pretend everything's all right, especially as women. It's not attractive for a woman to be angry, to be aggrieved, to be depressed. And the more that we turn into those when they're here, the more that they're actually going to transform us. And they're going to be the engine that helps to carry us to the shores of our new lives. And if we don't turn into those feelings, we're going to get stuck. That's not going to happen. We're not going to make our way out the other side and into our rebirth.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And I know that it's scary to feel the feelings because, first of all, like you say, we've been told that they're negative and we shouldn't be feeling them. That's not helping the situation at all. And also, those feelings are hard. They're difficult to feel. It's not like you can embrace the joy and the happiness, but when it comes to the real sorrow and sadness and depression and all of that despair, those are harder to feel. And like you say, we haven't been taught how to do that either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just, we learn as we go. It's a process. And again, one of the reasons why I wrote this book, so it could be a companion for women to say, okay, now you're feeling shock. Here's how we can work with it. You're feeling loneliness. Okay, here's how we can meet the loneliness. Here's anger. Okay, what do we do when anger's here? What about grief? What about resentment? And we can just go through it step by step as we meet all of these layers that are really challenging to be with and not socially acceptable to feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. I love that. It has been an absolute delight. Is there anything else? Well, first of all, tell people how they can get a hold of you. I'll have a link underneath the video, but just let people know what's the best way.
Sure. You can go to my website, which is my full name, saraavantstover.com. And there you'll find the link to the book. It's also available wherever books are sold. I have a podcast that integrates IFS and women's spirituality. It's called Herself. And you can also connect with me on Instagram at Sara Avant Stover.
Wonderful. And I encourage people to check that out. Is there anything else you want to add before we go?
I think just the final thing, which we've already touched on some, but is to really just let your process take as long as it takes. It's important. And my process took several years. It took far longer than I ever thought it would take or thought it should take. And now I'm so grateful for the women that I've become as a result of that. And I want other women to have that experience too. It is totally possible for you to have a big transformation, to have a rebirth after a challenge. And you need to let it take as long as it takes and go in it and through it with support.
Yes, with support. Absolutely. And so grateful for what you do and all the women that you're helping. So thank you so much. And thank you for taking the time today. And thanks everyone for listening. And bye for now.